Imagine a long road stretching back before modern cities, before written records. If we travel far enough down that road, we arrive at a wild, beautiful island covered in deep green forests and cold rivers, completely cut off from the known world. Small groups of early people lived quietly in these valleys. They built simple lives, closely tied to the land and water around them, believing the rivers held spirits and the trees were alive with power. To connect with the sun and the turning seasons, they dragged multi-ton stones across the land to build great circles. Those standing stones remain silent and still today, a permanent mark of their complex early beliefs. That deep isolation cracked in the year 55 BC. A Roman general named Julius Caesar looked at a map, pointed to this distant island, and sent his legions across the sea. The local tribes fought bravely, but they faced highly disciplined soldiers carrying standardized iron weapons. Rome's victory integrated the island into a continental network of tax, law, and military discipline, replacing tribal autonomy with the machinery of a global state. The Romans stayed for 4 centuries, laying down long, straight roads, building heavy stone bridges, and establishing the first highly structured towns on the island. Then, the vast Roman Empire began to fracture from within. The legions were urgently called back to the continent to defend their failing borders, packing up and leaving as quickly as they had arrived. When the last Roman ship departed, the island was left entirely unprotected. Its newly built infrastructure sat wide open, creating a dangerous power vacuum that would invite centuries of violent incursions. Across the freezing waters of the North Sea, opportunistic farmers and fierce warriors from modern-day Germany and Denmark saw an opening. They loaded into wooden boats and pushed through heavy swells to claim those undefended green valleys. These settlers, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, began calling their new home Angleland. Over generations, that name softened into England. The words they brought with them formed the rugged, early bedrock of the English language we speak today. They carved the landscape into a patchwork of small, independent kingdoms, each ruled by its own king and governed by its own localized laws. But the horizon darkened again. Fast, narrow longships arrived from Norway and Denmark, carrying the Vikings. These fearless sailors struck with terrifying speed, raiding coastal monasteries for gold and burning entire villages to the ground. The Vikings initially came to steal, but soon they started to stay. These violent collisions of warring tribes meant their pagan gods, harsh vocabularies, and distinct cultures were forced to bleed together into one chaotic society. As the Viking armies crushed kingdom after kingdom, King Alfred of Wessex was pushed to the absolute brink of defeat. He was forced to flee his throne and hide out here, deep in the cold, isolating wetlands of Somerset. Hiding in the swamps, Alfred realized that raw courage could not beat Viking speed. He needed a system. He spent his exile meticulously training a highly organized army and designing a network of fortified towns called burhs. When he finally marched out of the marshes, his new military machine worked. He met the Viking leader Guthrum in battle and secured a comprehensive victory. But Alfred refused to execute Guthrum. Instead, he offered his enemy peace, land, and baptism, actively integrating the Vikings into the fabric of his expanding kingdom. Alfred knew that a kingdom held together only by swords would eventually break. He believed true resilience required educated, thinking people. So he ordered a systemic translation of Latin texts into the everyday English language so his people could read and learn. This specific document shows the physical result of that effort. It is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a detailed, handwritten record of their shared history, compiled year by year. By giving the people a shared history in their own tongue, Alfred ensured that language and literacy became the mortar holding his kingdom together. He planted the seed for a single, united nation. Then, in 1066, a brutal new wave arrived. A Norman duke named William crossed the English Channel to claim the throne. Look at this linen. It depicts the sheer violence of his cavalry smashing into the English shield walls at the Battle of Hastings. William the Conqueror won. His Normans stripped the local lords of their power, imposing a strict French-speaking ruling class, and constructed towering stone castles across the land to physically control the native population. The Normans forced their vocabulary into English. Rugged Germanic root words collided with elegant French terminology. Words like beef, castle, and justice came straight from the new rulers. French acted as the final ingredient in a historical mixing pot, creating our layered vocabulary today. England was never built by one type of person. Its identity is the continuous, resilient blending of ancient tribal people, the Roman builders, Anglo-Saxon farmers, fierce Viking raiders, and Norman conquerors. This centuries-long layering of different peoples is why English vocabulary feels so varied. When the Normans arrived, they didn't replace the Old English words. They sat on top of them, creating the double meanings and inconsistent spellings that define the language today. Every time you struggle with a strange spelling or learn a new synonym, you are interacting with a ghost from that timeline. Every word you master is a step down that same ancient road. View your education as a personal continuation of this story, where every lesson adds your own voice to England's long road. Keep walking, keep listening. The road ahead is full of wonderful things.